Walter Andrew Brennan was born in 1894 to an Irish immigrant father, and from the start he nurtured dreams that went beyond the hustle of big cities. In quiet recollections, he would tell stories of how he first felt at home, not on a stage or in the bright lights of a movie set, but outdoors in the open fields near his Massachusetts childhood home. Even in those early days, a longing for space, tranquility, and self-reliance settled in his bones. The personality that shaped his love for wide horizons also found expression in his choice of homes. When he eventually rose to fame in Hollywood, he wasn't content simply to buy a fancy mansion in the hills. There was a drive inside him to build personal realms that would shield him from the glare of the spotlight and let him savor the small satisfactions of daily life. He did, of course, maintain a presence in Hollywood, a modest home to keep him close to the film studios during those feverish years when it felt like he was in every Western or war film that came out of Tinseltown. But even that Hollywood base, as he called it, reflected something deeper. Neighbors described its design as unassuming, perhaps surprisingly so, given the robust paychecks he earned. The walls were decorated with understated Western prints, a few personal relics like a coiled lasso by the fireplace, and well-worn furniture that invited you to sit, have a whiskey, and tell a story. There was no shimmering crystal chandelier. Instead, there was an antique lantern, suspended low from an exposed beam, casting a soft glow. Many visitors recalled how they felt instantly comfortable there, as if they'd wandered into a cozy mountain cabin. Walter always insisted that the greatest luxury in life was being genuine, and if he was going to stay in Hollywood, he wanted a home that felt like the real him, not the polished star version. But that Hollywood home, while pleasant, was never more than a pit stop. The true heart of Brennan's domestic world was his ranch in Moore Park, California, which he eventually expanded with additional land near Joseph, Oregon, later in life. This might sound like the typical move for a Western star, to buy some sprawling property and play cowboy off-screen. But for Walter, it wasn't an act. Friends joked that he was born wearing boots and spurs, and he used his ranch as the place where he could breathe free of the demands of directors, producers, and fans. Once the camera stopped rolling, he traded set pieces for real acreage, carefully sowing the seeds of alfalfa and raising horses that he personally trained. Local rumor has it that he kept the original pair of boots from one of his earliest cowboy roles, and instead of putting them on a mantle, he wore them while riding around the property until they fell apart. The main house on the Moore Park Ranch had an unexpectedly simple facade, nothing like the Spanish Revival architecture, common in Southern California's wealthy enclaves of the mid-20th century. Instead, the structure leaned toward classic farmhouse style: white wood siding, a broad shaded porch, and a roof line that sloped down just enough to create a comforting sense of shelter. In the late afternoons, that porch turned amber with the dying sun, often revealing Walter's silhouette in a rocking chair, slowly sipping a mug of coffee he liked so black it felt like a statement of pride. There were no golden nameplates, no gilded fence, just a rough wooden gate with a discreet B inscribed on a plank, which you might overlook if you didn't know to watch for it. This was a celebrity's home that almost didn't want to be found. Inside, the living room stretched wide with a sturdy stone hearth that took center stage. The rumor was that the stone used for the fireplace was hauled in from a dried-up creek a few miles away, a detail that Walter insisted upon. He wanted those smooth river stones because they carried the memory of water. He liked to talk about it as a kind of metaphor, nature adapting, surviving, forging a path through time. He thought the stones, with their imperfections, taught more about resilience than any framed award on the wall ever could. Indeed, if you walked around that fireplace, you'd find the cracks and grooves that only nature can carve, each telling its own small story of erosion and endurance. People who visited recalled standing around that hearth, hearing Walter spin a tale about an old rodeo injury, or about the time Gary Cooper dropped by to share a jug of homemade cider after a film shoot. The atmosphere was tinted with orange firelight, the occasional sputter of burning logs, and the feeling that you were miles away from Hollywood's frantic pulse. Walter's wife, Ruth, played a significant role in the interior design. She favored earth tones and heavy, comforting textiles, so the ranch house exuded warmth, a place where crocheted blankets draped over worn leather armchairs, and the lighting was kept low. Ruth was also known for her fierce desire for privacy, a trait that grew stronger as Walter's star rose. She was the one who insisted on thick drapes for the windows, the color of forest bark, she'd say, ensuring that no paparazzo could easily peer inside. The dining room was large enough to seat a considerable group, but the decor remained modest. A simple wooden table, mismatched chairs that had seen better days, and an antique lamp that might have dated back to the Civil War. Guests were typically family or close friends. Rarely did the Brennans allow outsiders to trespass on these moments of intimate fireside conviviality. One story that has made the rounds in local lore is how John Wayne once paid a surprise visit, only to find Walter out in the barn mending a broken stall door. The Duke, as Wayne was known, had come expecting a more celebratory reception, but Walter refused to let the ranch chores wait. "If the stall's broken, you fix it," he told Wayne, handing him a hammer. Laughing, Wayne obliged, and the two of them spent the next hour hammering away side by side, swapping stories about injuries sustained on set and how neither man trusted fancy city slickers to do a good job with practical tasks. When they finally came inside for dinner, their clothes dusty and fingers sore, Ruth had set out a humble spread of chili and cornbread. Some might have expected a feast for two film legends, but the Brennans preferred the simple things. The moment became iconic among those who heard about it, capturing the essence of Walter's Ranch, a place where high-wattage celebrities swapped stardom for hand tools and chili bowls. It was precisely this no-nonsense, hands-in-the-dirt attitude that also took Walter to Joseph, Oregon, later in his life. The Oregon property was larger, wilder, and somehow more reflective of the wide-open landscapes he admired. He described falling in love with the Wallowa Mountains at first sight, enthralled by their stark, rugged beauty. Local ranchers were surprised to see an old Western film star buying up land there. Joseph wasn't a typical Hollywood retreat, but Walter always had an eye for authenticity. He built a log cabin-style home on the property, akin to something you might see in a remote homesteader's dream. The logs were thick and coated with a clear varnish that allowed the natural grain to glow in the midday sun. The roof was steep to stave off heavy winter snows, and a deep porch wrapped around two sides, granting views of the mountain peaks to the south and farmland to the west. After decades under the lights of stage sets, he'd finally built a set of his own that answered to no call of action or cut. Living in Oregon meant he could wake up to crisp, pine-scented air and the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. He was known to spend an hour each morning on the porch, a wool blanket draped around his shoulders, sipping from a tin cup of coffee while watching the early light break over the mountains. The interior of this cabin was more rustic than even the Moore Park Ranch, leaning fully into the frontier aesthetic. Timber beams crisscrossed the high ceilings, and rugs made from woven Native American designs lay across the floors. A cast-iron stove in the kitchen lent the space a pleasing aroma of burnt wood, which Walter found nostalgic. He claimed the smell took him back to his earliest days, filming black and white westerns, when sets were often built from rough-hewn wood that gave off a similar scent under the searing stage lights. Most people assumed that Western stars of the golden era might display their memorabilia in trophy rooms. Walter Brennan, however, had what he jokingly called his junk drawer, but was in fact a fully converted bedroom lined with shelving. On those shelves you'd find battered hats, broken spurs, old scripts, and weathered saddlebags from beloved film projects. It was pure chaos in that room, an unedited archive of a lifetime. If you looked closely, you'd see a string of Polaroids pinned to a corkboard. He took snapshots with various on-set animals he had grown attached to, particularly horses. He felt had personality. He once said that if a horse doesn't trust you, you have no business being on its back, and that line was scrawled in black marker on the Polaroid of him next to a large chestnut gelding from a lesser-known 1940s Western. This junk drawer room was in many ways a reflection of the man, unpretentious, messy, and real, stuffed to the rafters, with memories he wouldn't trade for any polished award. What many people didn't know was that Walter Brennan had a small hidden loft above this memorabilia room in his Oregon cabin. Accessed by a narrow ladder that pulled down from the ceiling, it was originally intended for storage, but Walter converted it into a tiny reading nook, complete with a single window that looked out onto an aspen grove. He would slip up there with a flask of whiskey and a dusty paperback novel, often Western novels, by Zane Grey or historical accounts of pioneer life. Some nights he would even sleep up there, if he wanted an especially quiet retreat. The space was so cramped that you could barely stand, yet he found it comforting to settle into its tight quarters. It reminded him that, at heart, he was still the boy from Massachusetts who had once dreamed of wide open spaces and the freedom to create his own little world. Throughout his life, Walter's homes, whether in Moorpark or Joseph, bore witness to all manner of personal joys and struggles. He was known to be conservative and outspoken in certain political matters. At times, these views created friction with colleagues and fans, and the occasional protester would drive by the ranch. Rumor has it that once, a group of college-age activists tried to confront him at the gate. Instead of yelling or calling the police, Walter invited them in for a conversation. Over lemonade in the front yard, they talked well into the afternoon about society, the war, the future of the country. In the end, they didn't agree on everything, but the group left with a handshake and an unexpected measure of respect. "Everyone's got a right to speak their piece," Walter said as they departed. That sense of neighborly hospitality seeped into the walls of his home. Even those who opposed his views couldn't deny the genuine warmth they encountered within. Interestingly, visitors often found the kitchens in Walter's houses to be telling. While many Hollywood personalities at the time opted for sleek modern appliances and polished countertops, Walter's kitchen was more akin to a busy workshop. Mismatched pans hung from a rack overhead, wooden spoons were piled in a cracked ceramic jar, and the old gas stove bore the stains of hundreds of hearty meals. A small transistor radio sat on the windowsill, often tuned to local talk programs or country music. Ruth might have fussed over the clutter now and then, but ultimately she embraced the organized chaos because it was how her husband operated. If you asked Walter for a spatula, he might rummage through several drawers before finding it, but to him, that was part of the charm. "I like life to be a little messy," he'd say. "Otherwise, how do you know you're living it?" The contrast between his Hollywood base, discreet though it was, and these sprawling rural escapes highlighted two sides of Walter's personality. In the city, he was the consummate professional, determined to honor the legacy he'd built through decades of work. That home, while cozy, still carried the pressure of proximity, close to film studios, producers, and the social obligations that came with stardom. In Moorpark and Joseph, however, he let go of formality. There was mud on the floor from boots, the lingering scent of horses in the air, and that intangible sense that time passed more slowly. A friend who spent a weekend at the Joseph cabin observed that Walter practically breathed differently out there. His shoulders loosened, his laughter came more freely, and he seemed content just to wander the property at dawn, letting the day reveal itself without agenda. Those who knew him well say that the turning point in his real estate story came when the success of his film and TV career allowed him to expand the ranch land near Moorpark and eventually purchase the Oregon property outright. That sense of ownership mattered to Walter. He'd seen colleagues lose fortunes in flashy deals or become reliant on a Hollywood system that could turn on them overnight. He wanted to secure a piece of the earth that couldn't be taken from him, a place to fall back on if the film industry ever decided he was no longer wanted. He once told a journalist, "Everything out here is real, from the dust to the grit under my fingernails." I'd rather spend my days with that than with folks who smile to your face and then forget your name. Those words, though simple, sum up the spirit that guided him to cultivate his private realms. One lesser-known anecdote about these properties involves a rumor that the Moorpark Ranch contained a hidden safe room. Some claimed it was built for storing valuables, perhaps firearms, or even cash. Others speculated it was more of a panic room, given the volatile climate of the Cold War era. Walter never confirmed or denied the existence of such a space, though. He had a mischievous grin whenever asked about it, saying only, "A man's got to protect what's his, doesn't he?" Adding fuel to the mystery, an old caretaker of the property mentioned a reinforced cellar door that hadn't been opened in years. Whether it truly was a safe room or just an old bomb shelter was never publicly clarified, leaving fans to wonder if the Cowboy star had more secrets beneath those rustic floorboards. Some nights, after a long day of ranch work, Walter would gather a small circle of friends around the living room, and inevitably someone would ask him to tell the story of his first big break. He'd recount how, by sheer accident, he began landing extra roles in films back in the silent era, eventually clawing his way into small speaking parts. He'd grin wryly and say he owed his trademark limp to a wartime injury, which ironically became a sort of character signature in Western films. But he would always bring the conversation back around to the home they were in, the physical manifestation of every hour he'd spent working in front of a camera, every line of dialogue delivered in dusty saloons or cactus-filled vistas. "This," he'd say, gesturing to the wooden beams overhead, "is what I earned from all that. A roof for my family, a place to be me, no lights, no script, just plain old Walter." And then, as if on cue, the fire in the hearth would pop, reminding everyone that it too was part of that payoff. This interplay of public and private identity shaped every nook and cranny of his homes. For instance, there was a small garden behind the Moorpark house, full of tomatoes, squash, and a few fruit trees. Late in his life, Walter took great pride in showing off the orchard's yield. He would hand visitors an apple straight from the branch, almost with the excitement of a child. Tended by his own hands and perhaps a couple of hired ones for bigger jobs, that garden was a microcosm of his life philosophy. If you nurture something patiently, it will feed you, body and soul. On warm summer evenings, he and Ruth would stroll among the plants, plucking weeds and talking about the day's news or reminiscing about the kids. The garden became a sanctuary of domestic peace, a gentle reminder that real fulfillment grew from the roots of consistency and care. A truly surprising snippet of gossip suggests that, in the early 1960s, a French count who was passing through California tried to buy the Moorpark Ranch, lock, stock, and barrel, for an extravagant sum of money. The Count was enchanted by the notion of owning a Hollywood Cowboy's domain. Walter allegedly refused without a second thought. He politely thanked the man for his interest, but made it clear that no figure could compel him to sell the piece of land he considered part of his own soul. The caretaker, who was present at the exchange, swore that Walter's voice never wavered, even when the Count upped the offer. "There's nothing to talk about, sir," Walter said, his tone final. In that moment, he might as well have been one of his movie characters, standing firm against a land baron threatening to take his ranch. It was a real-life demonstration of the kind of resolve and spirit that made him an icon. As the years went on, Walter's health began to wane. He spent more time in the coziness of those homes, particularly the cabin in Oregon, refusing to relinquish the comfort of that mountain air. Friends worried about him living up there, so remote from medical facilities, but Walter insisted on staying. He had found something intangible in those logs and beams, in the dirt paths lined with pine needles. It gave him both solace and a sense of purpose. Family members rotated visits, ensuring he had company and help with the day-to-day chores. There were days when he could barely walk outside, yet he insisted on being wheeled to the porch so he could watch the sunrise or listen to the wind comb through the aspens. When asked if he ever regretted not moving somewhere more convenient, he reportedly answered, "Convenience is for city folk. I've got all I need right here." The culminating image that visitors carried away from Walter Brennan's realm is of his bedroom in the final year of his life, a simple space smaller than you might expect. An old wooden bed frame, a quilt likely sewn by Ruth or a family member, and a nightstand stacked with Western novels, scripts, and a half-empty bottle of cough medicine. A single window faced east, letting in the first rays of morning. People said that in those last months he'd wake up just to greet the dawn, as though it were an old friend returning every day to say hello. He would watch the light stretch across the fields, illuminating every blade of grass that he'd come to treasure. In those moments, the boundary between Hollywood star and humble rancher dissolved entirely. He passed in 1974, but the memory of his domain still resonates among those who set foot on them. The Moore Park Ranch has changed hands since then, and the Oregon property, too, has been subdivided. Yet, local tales of the old actor who loved the land more than the red carpet linger like echoes in a canyon. People still claim to sense his presence, especially at dusk, when the sky flames over the ridges and a lone breeze whistles through tall grasses. It's as if Walter Brennan remains out there, leaning on a fence post, waiting for the hush of the evening to speak back. What did those homes mean to him? Perhaps they were a rebuttal to the fleeting nature of stardom, an anchor that tethered him to something honest. They revealed a man who, despite fame and wealth, valued rough hands and quiet sunsets. They showcased his determination to create sanctuaries that mirrored his core values: self-reliance, hospitality, and a deep respect for ordinary wonders. If the iconic sets of Hollywood westerns made him a legend in the eyes of millions, his own land, planted, tended, and stubbornly guarded, made him feel grounded in a way no stage or studio lot could. It's easy from the outside to reduce a star's life to glamour and success, but Walter Brennan's residences tell a more nuanced, intimate story of a man who saw the cowboy life not just as a cinematic role, but as the heartbeat of his identity. The ranches and cabins were extensions of that cowboy spirit, and though he acted in countless films, earning fans worldwide, it was these private spaces where the porch creaked underfoot and the fire crackled in the hearth that truly defined him. In the end, Walter Brennan's legacy isn't just on the silver screen. It lingers in the old fence lines, the worn floorboards, and the silent pre-dawn moments in a mountaintop cabin. It lives on in the memory of a man who refused to let fame overshadow his need for authenticity and who found in these earthly dwellings the comfort and belonging that elude even the brightest stars. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.